Hello, my name is Ray Bowman. I've spent 30 years involved in international trade, import-export. I'm a certified global business professional. I'm the director of the EDC Small Business Development Center. This is an SBA-funded program that gives free business advising services to small and medium-sized firms. I'm also the program chair for the Southern California District Export Council. We're a group of volunteers appointed by the U.S. Secretary of Commerce to promote international exports. I'm also a professor at California Lutheran University, as well as Santa Barbara City College, teaching courses in supply chain logistics, trade finance, and import-export. I also belong to a number of trade organizations, including the American Association of Exporters and Importers, as well as NASBITE, which not only developed and certifies the CGBP designation, but is dedicated to international trade education for small and medium-sized businesses throughout the world. In this lesson, we're going to talk about international truck freight and border crossing, specifically border crossing that has to do with the U.S. and Canada. So if you're in North America, one of the biggest trading relationships is that between U.S. and Canada. So it's really important that we talk about what happens with trucks that cross the border throughout North America. So just some quick facts. U.S.-Canadian trade, it's still one of the largest bilateral trade relationships. Bilateral trade has tripled since 1989. 1.5 billion crosses the border every day. That's value of goods. The relationship is characterized by rules-based trading and dispute resolution. Relationship between U.S. and Mexico is based on lower labor costs. U.S.-Canadian trade is based on quality, capacity, utilization. 40% of Canada-U.S. trade is between firms. So a lot of related party transactions go on between U.S. and Canada. Every vehicle that crosses contains $1,250 of Canadian parts. So if you look at every vehicle throughout North America, at least $1,200 of value is that of Canadian. Exports to the U.S. is roughly 25% of all Canadian GDP. U.S. accounts for 70% of Canadian exports, one half of Canadian agri-exports, and Canadian trade to GDP ratio is about 80%, and the U.S. is about 25%. So if you look at every billion, that's about 10,000 jobs. So the U.S.-Canada relationship is very important, and likewise it's important to understand the logistics that goes on between that international trade. So looking at some border crossing programs. So if you can imagine all the thousands and thousands of trucks that cross and deliver goods, you have to be really efficient at doing that. Now these border crossings are 24 hours, but you can imagine what delays would cost if every truck had to spend, extra minutes, hours, or so on the border. You could just imagine what that backup would look like. So there's all kinds of different programs that try to facilitate that truck trade on either side of the border. So on the Canadian side, there's a system called PARS, and that stands for Pre-Arrival Review System. And it's a Canadian customs system, and basically it allows for rapid release of cargo between importer and exporter. So it's basically release on minimum documentation. So if you can imagine, what it allows a truck to do is cross very rapidly based on being a known importer or exporter, and then the rest of the transactional documents have some time to process even after the truck is crossed. So that's basically what PARS is about. The U.S. version of PARS is called Paps, for Pre-Arrival Processing System. And again, this utilizes a barcode technology which allows documentation, information about the entry to be pre-entered into a system, which allows that truck to cross very rapidly based on a barcode. And then the rest of the entry information to be completed within a certain amount of time. There's another program called the FAST program. And this program is for mostly large shippers. A big user of this program is the automotive industry, where you have the same types of commodities, same companies, same buyer and seller in the transaction, transacting business on a daily basis. So what this program involves is for the entire supply chain, the trucker, the driver, the importer, the exporter in Canada, Canada-US, to be all registered within this system. So based on the entire supply chain being made up of these trusted partners, you're able to transact goods back and forth very rapidly. So this FAST system, a lot of these systems were developed prior, post 9/11, to look at and mitigate any interruptions in the supply chain. So the FAST program is between U.S., Mexico, and Canada, and again, it basically works on the entire supply chain: trucker, truck, driver, logistics companies, importer, exporter, to all be trusted partners in the program, so that release can happen very quickly. Another thing that's important to realize about border crossing is, unlike most of the ocean freight or air freight, where you have just a few airports, just a few ocean ports, when you get into border crossing, you have many different places where goods can cross. So if you look at this map here, you have all these different points of entry that are fairly close together. Take areas like Detroit, for example. You might have border crossings that are literally 30 minutes apart. So one of the things that happens, or one of the things that causes delays within the supply chain, is the fact that the importer, exporter, customs broker, and trucker aren't coordinated properly. In other words, if you have a trucker crossing at one border crossing, but the importer's broker isn't at that crossing, then you have delays and problems because there's no one there to clear it. So now phone calls have to be made. That broker may have to contact their agent that represents them on that border to contact that. By the time that happens, a shipment's been delayed severely. So one of the best practices in making sure that goods cross effectively and quickly is to make sure that the buyer and seller work out ahead of time not only the information to clear the goods, but the location at which that trucker is going to cross, to make sure that all the arrangements are there, so that when the trucker crosses the border, that the transaction is done very quickly and effectively. So, going over some basic steps of how a truck crosses the border, the shipper establishes a sales with their U.S. or Canadian buyer. The shipper determines the country of origin of the goods. That's still important with border crossing. If the goods are U.S., Mexico, or Canadian, then they must determine whether those goods qualify for NAFTA and make sure the proper NAFTA certificate is in place for them to cross. Shipper and buyer must select the trucker or the carrier. The shipper generates the commercial invoice for the trucker. The trucker prepares the Paps or PARS information, which will alert customs electronically of the goods arriving at the border, as well as the truck manifest information. So basically, there's going to be a truck manifest as well as the border crossing PARS or Paps information. The trucker arrives at the border and will present his or her manifest information. At that point, customs can clear the truck or the truckload or hold the truckload based on an inspection that's triggered. Trucker either deconsolidates in a warehouse or delivers directly to the importer or buyer. So you want to make sure that these goods, that you have the documentation in place, that documentation is sent well before the truck leaves so that there are no delays. One of the things you have to keep in mind is these trucks are crossing at all hours of the day and night, and a lot of those hours are off hours for customs brokers or logistics companies. So you want to make sure there are no problems when a truck is crossing in the middle of the night. And avoid those inspections because goods have to be offloaded to be inspected. And so now a shipment that should only be a couple days may stretch out well beyond that. So some best practices for crossing the border is make sure your commercial invoice is complete and includes payment term information, buyer-seller information, country of origin, currency of settlement, a general description of the item, unit price is itemized, and freight and insurance itemized on that invoice. If NAFTA applies, make sure the correct document is used. So if it's a Canadian shipment going and clearing into Canada, make sure that the NAFTA document for Canada is used. Likewise for US or Mexico. Make sure that your truck carrier pre-submits your information to the import customs broker. So it's very important to, if you're trucking goods to a buyer in Canada or vice versa, that you establish who the customs broker is and get them documentation as soon as possible. So I hope this helps you make your truck shipments more effective. Again, the U.S.-Canadian relationship is a huge relationship. Most companies make their in the U.S. make their first export into Canada, and likely for a Canadian company. So it's really important to make sure that those shipments run smoothly and effectively. So I hope this tutorial helps you out, and see you next time.